I say thank you to those that behind the scenes have been able to make this a success. I think this has been a spectacular opportunity for us to get together. And when we started this experiment, we were curious how this was going to all work, and just really appreciate the support of the Red Lodge community as we're this kicked off our inaugural kind of annual community spotlight. We have this as an idea, and initially way back when we formed this organization. So huge thanks to Dave and Tom. Thanks for being our guinea pigs, and I think this was a huge success. How did folks feel about the past 2 days? Was this a valuable use of time?
Absolutely.
Heads are nodding.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think this has been a success.
I've like getting away and just literally thinking only about resort tax all day with different flavor, you know, rather than a distraction. It's like the mind is here, lots of notes.
It's kind of fun just to see what we can steal from each community and bolt onto what our own independent communities are doing. You know, I think the sessions this year were our first stab at doing these things. And so, you know, would solicit for feedback from the collective is, you know, we tried something out here and I think this was a success. We can maybe even dive in deeper on specific topics if need be. So you'll wind up hearing from us, I think, for a survey just to see what else might be possible as we move forward with this. As a reminder, we have a board that is seated for the Resort Tax Association. That board has helped to support the organization over the last year behind the scenes, and our full membership gathers twice a year. And so the last time that we met was, let's see here, would have been at the League of Cities and Towns in October down in West Yellowstone. And so that board is myself as the president, Dan Walker, as the vice president, Dana Smith, as the secretary treasurer, Misty Edwards as a director, and Dave Westwood as a director. And then we have voting members as well. So each community does have a vote, and this is where we take formal action. We have Ron Benton with Big Mountain, myself, Big Sky, Eric Hanks, Columbia Falls, Misty Edwards with Craig, and then Richard Parks with Gardner, Tom Kuntz with Red Lodge, George Bailey with St. Regis, Dan Walker with West Yellowstone, Dana Smith with Whitefish, and then Misty Edwards again with Wolf Creek. Let's do a quick roll call of who we have in the room. Just Big Mountain here, Big Sky here, Columbia Falls. Do we have Columbia Falls online?
Yes.
Columbia Falls is here. Eric Hanks.
Eric? Is that Eric?
Yeah, correct. Eric Hanks at Columbia Falls.
Awesome. Welcome, Eric. Craig?
Here.
Gardner? Here. Red Lodge? St. Regis? St. Regis is absent. West Yellowstone? Present. Whitefish?
Here.
Wolf Creek?
Here.
Great. So with that, I think we'll move on to our formal action. So there are 2 action items here listed for the board, and then 3 action items listed for membership. The packet, which I believe has been emailed out. Did we get that out to everyone who was online or?
Online, I'll gather emails and get it after, but I will do my best to screen share and keep up while we're going through.
So in the packet, we have minutes from the January 22nd and March 5th board meeting. I'd entertain a motion from the board, that's those 5 individuals, to approve the minutes as presented.
Move to accept the minutes as presented.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All the vote, all those in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. We'll move on to the next agenda item, liability insurance quotes and approval. Dan, you've been busy. Thank you for doing some research.
I've been annoyed.
Spread your annoyance.
I'm just telling you that I'm retired from getting insurance quotes
Great.
after this meeting. Yeah, so I had 3 names, 3 firms. 2 responded and offered quotes. One was Stockman Chubb, and the other one was Marsh and McLennan. emailed me this morning. He had just some preliminary numbers. Which would be between 3,100 and 3,300. This is not really, I gave him information, I gave both of them information and then they provided the quotes, so. Obviously the one we have in the packet is self-explanatory. You can see, I don't know
Yeah.
if that's what we need or not. I'm not the expert on that issue, so, I guess if there's a recommendation, I mean, I think that the Stockman Chubb is about half the price of the other one, so.
Has anyone done any business with any of these entities?
We use Marshall Planet County. They're good, but they're providing the exact same service and they're twice as much.
Yeah.
I think Chubb is the better.
Did we get this packet sent out? One of our members who's on remotely right now happens to be in the insurance business, and I was just gonna see if she's seen it, if anything jumped out at her, but.
If anyone online wants the packet, if you want for your chat and email, I'll send it over to you real quick on the fly.
Can I ask kind of a simple question? What are we worried about?
What's the risk?
I
Yeah, what's the risk?
think it's just directors and officers insurance liability risk is probably what we're talking about, I
Well-
guess.
Well,
Like errors and omissions? Is that what-
like, yeah,
What's our worst case scenario if we don't have insurance? What's our exposure?
I think this is Dana on the board. I think the important thing is that we're managing taxpayer funds for many of these. And so, there could be a situation where Resort Tax community has an issue, and then they could look at where those funds go. I think just any kind of, reporting that's done, IRS to the state, every association should have some type of liability policy to cover those directors and officers, so that we aren't personally held liable, because as you know, that like City of Whitefish liability insurance would not be covering me working under the association. We're gonna have to have coverage separate from that.
yeah, I guess the question would be, is that risk that you're describing, is that what they're insuring against? Cause that. I'm not seeing a really good understanding of what the coverage levels are, so it just be, if we're worried about something, we just wanna make sure that that's actually what we're insuring against. We're not getting insurance that's covering us for something that we're not worried about.
I believe it's covering, when you read, I don't know, it's on their page 1, but directors and officers and entity liability, fiduciary liability, which comes down to the funding. Crime, obviously, if we had somebody steal, we have insurance to manage that. So definitely, I think this is probably a very standard association liability policy. That covers, so you have like employee theft if you had something like that, but it does have coverage. I believe it meets the coverage necessities of our association.
I guess if you're gonna strike something, maybe the crime aspect, like fiduciary liability, I think covers what Dana was just commenting on. And the DNO liability as well.
I think crime's always very important to have when it comes to, like fraud when it comes to computer stuff. Those kind of things can happen if we're using credit cards. Our website is somehow, maintaining data, all of that. We're gonna want something in there when it comes to a crime policy. I mean, the City of Whitefish absolutely has a crime policy and a cybersecurity policy. I don't know why we'd be any different. And just maybe for the board's understanding, the budget that we had last year and the next budget, we assumed $2,000. So this quote is under that budget amount.
And is that about 20% of our budget? Is that correct?
Liability?
The insurance is, I'm looking at the insurance as a cost of our, as a percentage of our overall.
Um, eh, in a year that we don't, so depending on when we have the lobbyists and how we're changing that, but for FY 25's budget, no, it was not. Our budget was about $34,500 and $2,000, you know, you're looking at less than 10%. The way the budget's changing with having the lobbyists paid over 2 years instead of all in 1 year, then it is about 25%, 20%, yeah.
This is Jody, from Red Lodge.
Jody, your mic is, we're not hearing your mic, so your mic is not picking up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's on my phone and not my computer. I'll put it in a message.
Jody, can you put your comments in the chat window, please?
Is that your insurance?
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's calling from her insurance office, so.
She said, yeah,
And I-
she's on it.
Yeah, yes, do it.
Yes, she'll put it in the chat.
Oh, yeah, she'll put it in the
I
chat,
think-
all
I think
right.
that's what that yes.
I guess I hate it, but I understand the necessary evil of it, and if it's protecting against an exposure that we have, it sucks, but it does.
It's always good to ask the question, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Like,
yeah,
this
fun to
is
ask the
this-
question.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's probably correct. I mean, I think it's probably a lot of money for the risk. in My mind, but
If you are doing anything with lobbying, I would
probably
absolutely
not
recommend
gonna
this
be anything
policy.
less than that.
Insurance, but-
There you go.
I'll make a motion that we take the quote from Stockman Chubb.
Do a second.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Oh, sorry.
I'll go ahead and
So,
second,
I
because
just
that
second,
second
yeah,
needs to be from the board.
Yeah,
You-
sorry.
I'm the voting member.
No, you're the voting member, but now we're the board.
Oh,
We're keeping you on your toes.
Oh, yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah.
that is, got it. Now I'm confused.
The first two were board.
Yeah, you're right,
Okay.
you're right. That's good discussion. All right, so we had a motion from Dan and a second from Mayor Westwood. Any further discussion? All right, call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Next on our agenda is FY 26 dues. Dana, do you wanna kind of guide us through this? Obviously there might be some questions related to the budget, so you may need to tiptoe into that as well, so. we'll turn it
Yeah,
over
I
to-
think if we could adjust the budget or adjust the agenda and then start with the budget, I think that might help drive what the dues are doing here.
That sounds great. I don't think anyone will argue with that. Why don't you jump into the agenda item FY 26 budget approval?
Okay, great. So as I mentioned earlier, fiscal year 25, we are on a fiscal year, July through June. Fiscal year 25, which is not shown right now, we had an adopted budget of $34,500 for expenditures. We had budgeted to collect about $35,401. And a lot of that cost, $20,000 was set aside for legal and lobbying. Because lobbying is really every 2 years. One of the things that we wanted to do was how do we reduce the membership dues over time? Well, if we collect for the lobbying over a 2-year period, it does minimize the dues. So for the budget itself, if you want to go to the fiscal year 26 budget, you'll see that we have assumed collections based on the due structure. So that could change based on where dues come in, who's paying what. But we would need to generate about $17,000 in revenue. And then if you scroll to the bottom, which I should say revenue is basically membership fees. And then a little bit from the spring membership meeting, because we are charging $25 for paying members to attend. A lot of that has to do with the cost of the, food in the facility. But from an expense side standpoint, we have office supplies, very minor, $35. Probably won't even use that, but I've had to buy, checks, envelopes, postage, because I'm mailing out payments and those kind of things. And I don't feel comfortable utilizing the city's stuff for that, although we are a member. And then the main, we have the spring membership meeting. So if you were to scroll to the right, you'll see that our spring membership meeting, we have budgeted a small portion of funds, about $500 for the whichever community will be hosting, to have some funds to you rent a facility or provide some type of refreshments. That number is just a plug number right now. We do have website maintenance and email maintenance for the emails for the association, so it's fairly detailed compared to what I'm used to. And then the big one is the lobbying of the 2027 session. So what you'll see on this is there is no lobbying in the 2027 session in this year's fiscal year 26 budget, because we do not anticipate contracting with a lobbyist until the next fiscal year, which would be fiscal year 27. We do have professional fees, so hiring a CPA, I've worked to try to get a quote. I have not gotten a response. Might have to look at some other CPA firms out there. But for filing with the IRS, helping with the financial reviews, just to ensure that the financial reporting is good. While I'm a CPA and you have somebody in this role that can do it, that might not always be the case. And I think that's important to know. Insurance, we just adopted a lower rate that could be reduced, a few $100s. And then software, there's an assumption that we could have our bookkeeping actually on a software platform. Right now I'm doing it in Excel, so I've saved money, but in the future, it's going to be good to have it in a very QuickBooks is actually pretty expensive. There's some other online subscriptions that you can have for other programs to just track expenses. And so the total cost for fiscal year 26 is estimated about $9,300. As I mentioned above, we're projecting to collect about 17,500. And that amount is much higher than the expenses in that year. But when we look out to FY27, and you guys don't have the FY27 budget here, but I do have one that was prepared, you'll see that in FY27, we're going to have about, we would have about, wrong budget, sorry, I have it on my screen here. We're assuming about $15,600. Plus all of the other operating costs that we have in 26. So that would put us at a loss that year. We'd be at 23,000 in fiscal year 27 of expenses, but we're only going to collect 17,000 because we're trying to keep dues flat. But we're going to eat into reserves on purpose. So we're basically collecting for half of the lobbying in FY26, knowing we're not going to spend it till FY27. And just to be clear, you're talking a few months that we're waiting to do that. So that's kind of the overall budget. But before we adopt the budget, I'd like to actually go back to dues, because that's going to drive how we can actually fund these. So I wanted to give a little background on why the dues are set at a goal of $17,300. In the past, so fiscal year 25, there was a decision that by the board and the membership, I believe as a whole, to have our dues based on your annual collections. And I believe it was like 0.09%. I'd have to pull that up. And this is what you can see, what's on the screen here is fiscal year 25 dues versus what we're proposing for fiscal year 26. Because the lobbying is going to be spread over 2 years, most are seeing a decrease. The only ones that are seeing an increase are the smaller communities that do not collect as much. And just to be clear, of those, 2 of them aren't even participating. And the highest increase is about $164.17. All of the other communities would see a decrease in the amount provided. There was a lot of discussion of, in our current format with a percentage, Whitefish, West Yellowstone, and Big Sky are carrying the load for this association. And while we understand that that really needed to happen the first year, it's something that over time we've hoped that we've proven that there's value to the association and that those costs can be shifted among all communities a bit more equitably. When you look at just because we collect resort tax, and I'm sure this is for other communities, we can't use our resort tax on this association. We have to use our general fund taxpayer dollars. So we're going to the taxpayers. For Whitefish, for example, on there, we spent about $6,000 for this association in the last year. And same with West Yellowstone. And so the board had talked about this. So if you scroll up a little bit, you'll see that we've created this due structure where it's more as a set dollar amount if you're in a certain range. So 15 million plus, turns out that's pretty much Big Sky. Nobody else is there. It would be $8,000. Whitefish and West Yellowstone, excuse me. We're in that $5 to $15 million of revenue generated. And then $1 to $5 million would have a dues amount of $1,000, and then under $1 million would be $200. And keep in mind, these dues not only include lobbying efforts, but also this annual 2 conferences, really, and then all the resources on that website that are maintained as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Danny, on how you want to proceed with this in the discussion. But that's my general overview of what, as the treasurer and board and finance group, we've come up with.
Dana, thanks for taking all the time and energy to really dive in and sort this out. So this is a membership action item. We have 2 separate action items. One, the approval of the budget, and then the approval of the dues. I think let's start with any questions, comments related to the budget for Dana and team.
I have a question. I see this is going down mostly across the board. And also this is not a lobbying year. What do we anticipate this would look like next year?
So next year, the only change that we would see is that in that lobbying line where it says 2027 session, I tentatively have about 15,600 in there. That could go up to 16,000. It depends on what the rates are, the RFPs that we put out, what we get. But it would be in the range of $15,000 to $16,000, or that's kind of my estimate at the time. I don't know for sure, but with that added, 15,600 added, you see we'll have a net income of $9,300. Well, with that 15,000 added in the next year, with keeping dues flat for 2 years, we would still end up with a positive end of the year income of about $2,500. So we're not retaining a ton of cash. It's a small amount. It could be where the membership meeting is more than $500 in fiscal year 27. So you could eat into that $2,500, but we're not sitting here with a significant amount of reserves because that's not our intent.
So what I heard is it would actually be, it's a 2-year. We're not looking at a balloon and everybody's going, yay, ours went down. Oh wait, it's going to double next year.
Correct. Yes, these rates really, based on what I've done for my projecting into 27, the rates would stay the same for 2 years.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dave or Dan?
Yeah, I just have a comment. I know, I was not very happy with the way that the due structure was in the past. Obviously, I've made my comments before that I think it's important that all the entities, have a little bit of skin in the game and are participating. So, just on behalf of West Yellowstone, I appreciate that, we have to justify these to our councils and all these dues and associations to make sure there's value there. And it's gonna be a little bit easier to do so, at that level, so. And as I've mentioned before, I know that, I've said, the smaller associations, I think they have an opportunity to also not just contribute financially, but just with a little bit of volunteerism and helping out, the association in other ways, so. I hope that message is received, so thank you.
Thanks for that comment, Dan. And I should have mentioned before we jumped in, Shane is gonna get himself or Hebgen Lake signed up once we get all this structure. I did talk to Brian Wells, he's gonna get Cook City on board. So I think we're just missing Virginia City, so if they get to Virginia City. They're the last holdout. Any other comments related to the budget, questions for Dana? Okay, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the budget. This would be from the full membership.
So. West Yellowstone.
Michelle Stone made the motion. Do we have a second? Second. Gardner seconded. Any further discussion? I'll just call each community out then by vote. We'll start with Big Mountain.
Aye.
All those in favor say, I think you've run. Big Sky, aye. Columbia Falls,
Aye.
Craig,
Aye.
Gardner,
Aye.
Red Lodge. Aye. St. Regis, absent. West Yellowstone. Aye. Whitefish,
Aye.
Wolf Creek.
Aye.
Great, motion passes, and that will take us over to the FY 26 dues. I'll entertain a motion to approve the dues as presented.
Question first.
Yes, sir.
Dana, this is Ron from Big Mountain. When do you start the ticker for example, when our dues are due? Because right now we're zero, but sometime in the next year, we will, cross the million threshold. And I'd be happy to pay, at the 1 to 5 million versus the under 1 million, but I need to know where your clock starts.
So it would be your previous fiscal year. So dues are due. Should be submitted, I think in October, September, I can't remember what date it is. And so for fiscal year 26, which starts July 7th, we'll look back at what your collections were as of June 30th of 2025.
So I'm laughing, thank you. I know that's gonna be a small number.
That's an easy calculation.
Well,
Yeah.
it's good. Well,
It's a June, but yeah.
Thanks for the question. Any other discussion? All right, we'll call the vote. We had a motion in a second, right?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve the FY 26 dues.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Great, any further discussion around the dues?
This is Dana. Is somebody taking notes of who said those? Because I'm also
got-
like supposed to take minutes, so.
I got it, Dan. I'll send them to you after.
My
Okay,
biggest
thank you.
biggest failure of the meeting so far has not been thanking Jenny and Tammy for everything that they have done to set this up. And Jenny and Tammy always keep us on track, so got notes being taken here.
You're here.
We'll call the vote. Big Mountain,
Aye.
Big Sky, aye. Columbia Falls,
Aye.
Craig,
Aye.
Gardner, aye. Red Lodge, aye. St. Regis is absent. West Yellowstone, aye. Whitefish,
Aye.
Wolf Creek.
Aye.
Dana, thank you very much for putting some forethought into this and particularly in thinking about this in a kind of multi-year aspect. So really appreciate all of your time and energy. Let's move on to the next item of our fall 25 and spring 26 meeting dates. I believe we have locked ourselves in inadvertently from the League of Cities and County States that are happening. So the fall meeting is in Billings, I believe. Yes. Is that correct? Yes. And October 15th would be the date that we would be looking at doing our meeting, which would include a full meeting of the membership, but not these kind of breakout sessions that we had during our conference. That's will be done during like the community spotlight. So that October 15th, I guess the thing there would be save the date, and Tammy will be sending something out to the full group relative to that. But we need to discuss spring of 2026. And locking in that date, but also asking if there are any communities that would be willing to volunteer their community as a host community. A hand is raised in West Yellowstone. Is anyone else interested?
I don't know about Gardner, but I see it as a possible thing we'd be interested in. Can't make any commitment on it today. My board doesn't even know what happens yet.
You want to start the conversation with them for 27?
Well, yeah.
Because we have a 26 taker,
Right.
maybe you just see if you can't lock in 27, and then we do potentially guard, I guess. Should be up for discussion because people are putting some miles on their vehicles, maybe that is something we should actually think through. Particularly Whitefish and Columbia Falls and those folks.
I was even gonna propose with Whitefish, Columbia Falls, Big Mountain, that we figure out a joint hosting.
Oh, that's a great idea. Could almost
Yeah.
kind of showcase different.
Seem to like each other.
Yep.
I would be happy to do that. And I'd rather do it in a non-legislative year because I do so much work for the city and the legislature. And so 26 would work for us. I highly doubt we'll be making it to Billings. And that's why I'm not in Red Lodge. It's a little far, although Lainey, she made the trek for me. So thank you, Lainey. But just, yeah, if there's a way to maybe shift which side of the state we're on every year, I think that'd be helpful, especially with the fall one over in Billings. It might be nice to put something over on the west side of the state for the spring meeting. But yeah, I think we could definitely do something with all three cities here.
How would people feel about next year since we drove all the way to Red Lodge for some of these folks?
But it was so
Sure.
totally worth it.
It was worth it for the margaritas. I like the idea of maybe moving into the western part of the state, and then we could do kind of Whitefish, Big Mountain, and Columbia Falls as a collection. Would folks be all right with that? Just in terms of spreading out the distance? Heads are nodding. Great. Ron, we'll coordinate with you, and then we can kind of figure out a game plan on how to integrate Columbia Falls and Whitefish. I probably should ask Eric at Columbia Falls if he's willing to do that. Eric, does that work for you?
Yeah, no problem working with Dana and Big Mountain.
Great.
Is that an action item or is that just?
It's just discussion, but what is
Proposing
action,
it-
actually?
Are you proposing a date right now?
Well, that's the next, yeah, do we want to talk about dates? May seems to work for folks. That,
What's the status of Glacier National Park? And
oh, that's a great question. When does Glacier open?
It's always
Uh,
open.
But it's open, the bears are out, everything else is out. And I think it's still pre-reservation
Okay,
time.
When is the big road shutdown done that they were doing for like a year or two?
Oh, Many Glacier, or the one on the lower going to Sun Road?
I'm not, I think it was the low probably.
Okay, I think that's all phase. I'm a patroller there, I haven't been up the road yet, I would be, except I'm here. No, nothing,
But totally worth it.
but totally worth it. And so, yeah, there are recreation opportunities right now, and if you don't get to Glacier often enough, that would be really cool.
Memorial Day weekend is as early as it can be next year.
is it?
Yeah,
It's on the 25th.
It's gonna be the 25th, yeah.
The same time as this next year, which is right before Memorial Day.
Yeah.
What is today's Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday?
This is about the last date that we'd be able to participate. But
Because once it starts up here, talk to you in the fall.
Fair.
I mean, for me, that's like if we did the same thing, that works the 19th, 20th.
So like the weekend before, or the week before rather.
It's
I
the
think
week
it's-
before, it's the same,
You're saying this week.
this week, same thing, yeah.
The 19th, 20th work for everyone?
Work for me. It's difficult.
Maybe Glacier Day on Daisy.
It's far enough out that it's pretty open.
Entertain a motion from the membership.
I'll also move that we schedule the spring meeting for the 19th, 20th in Whitefish,
Columbia
Yeah.
Falls area. Big Mountain. We have a
the
second?
Whitefishish area.
We have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, any further discussion? All right, we'll go ahead and call the vote. Big Mountain,
Aye.
Big Sky, aye. Columbia Falls,
Aye.
Craig,
Aye.
Gardner,
Aye.
Red Lodge,
Aye.
West Yellowstone,
Aye.
Whitefish,
Aye.
Wolf Creek.
Aye.
And St. Regis is absent. Great. Next on the agenda, do we have Gerald James on the line?
I'm here.
Barely. Great. This was uncharted territory for us, Daryl. Hiring a lobbyist, not necessarily having a clear path forward for what we're asking that lobbyist to achieve. I'm hoping that you can bring just a general update of anything resort tax related from the session or anything of noteworthiness from the session as well. And then I'd like to enter into a discussion just with the full membership about, you know, how do we structure this moving forward so that we're not kind of, I think everyone felt like we were like because we were reacting pretty quickly in the middle of a session and just didn't necessarily have our ducks in a row internally here. So Daryl, I'm wondering if you, have any recommendations, but before you dive into that, can you just give us a high-level overview of the session and anything specifically interesting to the folks in this room?
Sure. Thanks, Danny. And thank you all for having me this afternoon. Just a real quick overview of the session in general. There were about 4,500 bill titles at the beginning of the session. 18 of those turned into bills with actual language that were introduced. That's up from about 1,700 last session. There were a little over 800 bills passed into law last session, so we're probably going to be somewhere around 800 to 900 bills that will be passed into law. We started, there's a number of different software programs that can track legislation across the country. I used one here in Montana and just put in keywords for property tax, resort tax, workforce housing, all different kinds of things that you guys might be interested in. We started with a list of a little over 100 bill titles that we decided were relevant. We whittled that down to about 40 bills that we tracked all the way through the legislative session. Ranged from workforce housing tax credits, agricultural classification, property tax exemptions, reappraisal cycles, revise the definition of infrastructure for the resort tax, modifications to residential property tax. So there's just a wide variety of things on property tax, resort tax, that were relevant virtually all the way through the legislative session. I think unless anybody's got specific questions about bills or anything, I would like to focus my conversation on what might be of value moving you guys forward and how to be less reactive and maybe a little more proactive next legislative session. So unless anybody's got specific questions on that part.
Does anyone have anything for Daryl on specific bills? I think we're all interested in moving to the next discussion, so we would love to hear your thoughts on how to be more effective.
So, the biggest challenge for me, I think, and Dana, you said this, a lot of you guys are like actively engaged in the session yourselves and in your roles with your communities. So it's hard to kind of keep track of what you're doing versus what the association here needs to be doing. I think spending some time between now and the next legislative session, just mapping out those goals and priorities. I started putting together a framework that'll help kind of guide that conversation for you. Obviously, you want to keep tabs on what is it, 7615 in Montana code where resort tax is established, right? You want to pay attention to any modifications of definitions of what qualifies as a resort tax community district, population thresholds, percentage of economic activity that's required, any criteria for the Department of Commerce to designate an area. So you want to obviously keep track of any changes in 7615, just to make sure that you're fully apprised and engaged in those kind of conversations. Beyond that, I think you're looking at things like tax caps in the communities. I can't remember the number. Daniel Zolniko's Senate Bill 511 from last session changes the cap under 1510-420 for cities and towns and counties. Doesn't really have an effect on resort communities, but you want to keep an eye on those kinds of things to make sure that there's not a domino effect. Expenditure limitations. There's been a lot of discussion about limiting any kind of local government spending. Always a threat that spills over to resort tax areas. Property taxes, local option sales taxes, statewide sales tax, which is, I think, going to be a conversation. We can chat a little bit about that. Changes in the way that you're able to put levies on a ballot, any kind of ballot measure initiatives and how those are processed, vote margins, all that kind of fun stuff. Those are just off the top of my head, things that you might want to kind of keep tabs on. But I think having this group or a subgroup just think about what types of legislation maybe you've seen over the last several cycles, challenges that you may have or opportunities that you think are out there that you want to start taking on as a group, certainly in 27 and beyond. So I think having that conversation amongst this group, kind of setting out goals and priorities and positions, particularly on a lot of these issues, would be hugely beneficial to your government affairs folks in 27, so that they can really focus on a list of applicable bills. And when you start with 4,500 bill titles, it's pretty tough to start trying to winnow that down and figure out what you really need to pay attention to versus what may be of less interest and much less priority to the group. And it helps drive a conversation, and for me or whoever it is in 27 to come back to you and say, here's the development on this bill. Do you want to weigh in on it? Are we monitoring? Are we supporting, opposing? So just having that framework set up to know what to track, what position is likely going to be taken, and how you want to present that. I think I saw a hand go up over on the side of the screen.
I was just gonna add to that general list, unless we think it's really dead, that idea where they were gonna take away our ability to actually utilize lobbyists. That seems to me like a nice generic one to kind of keep on that list, because they were trying to kill us. That would have hurt us this year.
Yeah.
This is tax dollars doing that, so.
That will show us. Daryl, do you have any recommendations for structure on how we all get on the same page and stay like? These things happen so fast in the legislature, and we can't be going after like a full vote of the membership every time, like.
No, and I think having broad buy-in on your guidance document is important, but then, your legislative affairs committee should be, 2 to 3 people, right? That are providing guidance to your lobbyist.
Do we need a resolution or something of the organization to help provide you some, or in the future, whoever's working on this structure? How do you see that manifesting itself?
I do think that's smart, Danny. I think a resolution just amongst yourselves. I don't know what individual communities would need to maybe pass with their city commissions, to recognize that, hey, we're going to be represented by somebody else, and we're gonna turn over our kind of decision-making authority to this legislative committee. That might be something to look into. But I think a guidance document or a charter, a resolution to say, here are our priority issues, here are our likely positions, and these are the types of bills that we're going to track. And just outline how that's going to operate. You're going to elect a group of a committee of 3 that will provide day-to-day counsel and interaction with your hired lobbyist at that point. I think you can map that out in a I mean, it's a several page document. It's not a huge deal. And I'd be happy to help walk you through all that stuff.
That guidance document could be something that we decided on as a group, and then the application that this is in line with that or not, because I know the frustration and feedback I got back was, we had this meeting in October, what are we pushing? Nothing, and then suddenly we were, and I think that guidance document is what was missing.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that's important, is that, you know, if any of us have an idea that we're gonna be pushing something, even a thought that we might be pushing something, that then we might hope that this association support, that discussion should be starting before the legislative session, so that, you know, we don't come and like Red Lodge is like, oh yeah, we just had our representative drop a bill that affects resort tax, and we're hoping everybody would support it, but we didn't tell you anything about it.
Yeah.
Prior to that, right? Like, so I think that's, you know, I think that what he talks about, which is a guidance document, here are the things that we think we'll support, and here's the things we are going to try and stop. Do we all agree on this, and where do we have conflict?
Yeah.
You know, is there something, and you know, there is something that we could have conflict on, especially when you look at the difference between resort tax areas and municipalities, because they're very structurally different, and there could be things that might benefit a resort tax area, and I'm just speaking hypothetically, I don't have an example, that would hurt the other one. And so, you know, but if we know that ahead of time, and, you know, with this experience, maybe we will be better off knowing what kinds of conversations we have. Like, you know, workforce housing is probably something we should have been discussing at a meeting before it hit the legislature.
Yeah. Agreed.
But sales tax and the impact that's gonna have on us, I think, is, we're all pretty universally, that's like our biggest fear. What happens if they do a statewide, and how does that impact all of the resort communities?
Dana, would you be able to, I think you're heading up our legislative committee, is that correct?
Am I the head of it? I thought I was head of finance. Aren't you head of legislative? I can't be treasurer and head of everything around here.
That may be the case.
This might be indicative of part of the
Is there
problem.
a group of people that would be willing to work with me and the legislative committee to bring something to the fall meeting, and we can start that conversation to get like a skeleton resolution? And I mean, I don't see any reason to wait until next year.
Yeah, I'd be interested. I've played in the legislative pool quite a lot for other organizations. I think I've got some relevant experience.
I would hope Tom would volunteer, because he does a lot of swimming in that pool too.
Do we gotcha? Okay. Me, Tom, Richard, and we'll figure out if Dana's on that committee or not.
I am on the committee. I just wasn't the lead of the committee, is what I was saying.
Great, your leader of the committee is now tapping a few more people to support this as we move into the fall. So thanks everyone for the discussion. What else relative to legislative? Is there anything else, Daryl, and Daryl, obviously, if you'd be willing to help us with that as we.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
More than happy to.
Could I just ask Daryl, I mean, our lobbyist said that sales tax is definitely coming forward in potentially the next session or the one after that. Is that what you're hearing as well?
There's been quite a bit of conversation. If I've got just a couple minutes here, I'll give you the kind of the rundown on property tax and where we're heading with sales tax. You know, with the passage of 231 and 542, it didn't really get to where I think most people thought we were going to get with property taxes. And frankly, I'm not sure you can, right? All we're doing is shifting property taxes. So without another revenue stream, we're just going to shift those taxes around. 231 basically provides, a relatively good reduction in residential property taxes. It shifts it to centrally assessed refineries and second homes of higher value. And I know that's a concern to some of you guys. If you look at centrally assessed, you think of MDU, Northwestern Energy, they're going to pass that property tax increase back to the ratepayer. So it's not really a reduction. It's putting money in one pocket and taking it out of the other for Montana ratepayers. Second home, Department of Revenue is already looking at loopholes around that. So any good tax attorney or accountant's going to look at that law and say, you're not going to pay this tax. You're going to pay the regular tax. So that's about $150 million in revenue that the Department of Revenue is forecasting that is not going to come in. So that's just going to go right back on the residential property taxpayer. So we're not going to see significant property tax relief through those two measures, but the legislature made an attempt, so they're going to pat themselves on the back. I spent a fair amount of time talking to Bob Story with Montana taxpayers throughout the session. And Bob was involved in quote unquote the big bill back in 1999 when we kind of redid the property tax structure, limited under 1510 420 the rate of growth for local governments. You know, that half the rate of inflation cap was raised to a full rate of inflation this session. As most of you know, that still doesn't allow you to keep up with, in a growing community, certainly doesn't allow you to keep up with the demands for infrastructure and other services. So you still don't have the tools necessary. When you look at the backlash that's going to come from centrally assessed and small commercial operations next session, we're going to be back in the same boat and saying, okay, who's going to pick up the ticket for the next couple of years? I asked Bob about, you know, when you set this thing up with half the rate of inflation, obviously that doesn't work. What was the legislature's thought at that point? And he said, you know, the unspoken thing was it's going to have to be a sales tax at some point. Here we are 25 years later, and nobody's really had the political will to do it. The governor has said, you know, under his watch, we're not going to have a statewide sales tax. I think he's recognizing that that you know, in a second term when there's nothing else at risk, it's probably worth a conversation. A number of Republicans in the legislature are willing to have the conversation. They just don't want to be the tip of the spear. I talked to the Chamber of Commerce 2 weeks ago and said, Todd, it's time to have this conversation. Well, Daryl, it polls really poorly, and it's like, yeah, but that's your job. The target is now on the back of businesses, and it's time to get serious about a statewide sales tax if that's what you want to do. If people want to reduce residential property taxes, then that's the only way you're going to backfill it is by taxing tourism that impacts roads, bridges, water, sewer, police and fire protection in your communities. And I hope I'm not getting anybody's hackles up on this just yet, but the way to obviously do that is to make sure that the Constitution caps a state or a sales tax at 4%, right? But we already have the bed tax and the I can't remember what the other one is.
Lodging facility tax.
Lodging facilities, thank you. The use tax. You're already exceeding 4% with those two, right? So we've already proven, or at least it's not been contested, that you can have individual taxes that add up to more than 4%. So layering a statewide sales tax on a local option or a resort tax, in most attorneys' views, would not be unconstitutional. It would be certainly allowable. So you'd certainly want to be at the table and be involved in that conversation, but I do think a statewide sales tax conversation is coming. But it's, you know, whether it's a legislative effort or a ballot initiative, I think remains to be seen. I think most folks involved in the conversation right now are saying it's going to be a ballot initiative because the legislature is just not going to do it. And frankly, if I were in local government, I think I'd want it to be a ballot initiative with a constitutional amendment to make it ironclad so that you don't start collecting a tax that then the legislature can turn around and steal a couple of years later. So, but Dana, that's what I'm hearing on the street is the conversation's coming, but it's going to be a big statewide multimedia effort to get that rolling because it pulls. Depending on where the revenue goes, it pulls roughly 50-50. You start talking about property tax relief and spending the remaining revenues on either schools or critical local infrastructure. and the polling numbers start to look a little bit more favorable, but certainly not to the point where a lot of our politicos are going to step up and start beating on the drum on it.
How do we have a voice in that conversation? I mean, do you have a thought on how we could insert ourselves into navigating these waters as that conversation begins to materialize? I mean, I think we're all a little nervous about what that means for our independent resort taxes. How do we navigate this conversation, Daryl?
You know, if I had to guess, I'm going to say the chamber is going to lead the charge on this. I've talked to Bob Story about, putting together a small coalition to kind of put pressure on the chamber to say, hey, how do we do this? Who do we bring to the table? If I'm in any way involved in that, I'd certainly want to loop you guys in, because you're part of the affected communities, right? So it's not going to be just Mako in the league. It's got to be, you guys have as much interest, if not more so, than some of them do. So I'm certainly happy to keep you apprised of anything that I hear going on.
I think there's some other big players in this thing when it comes to statewide sales tax, and that are really going to show is it's going to be lodging, it's going to be restaurant, it's going to be tavern, right? Just because of who's going to get taxed.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the reality is that, those three entities is where the majority, and we know this, right? Where does the majority of our taxes comes from? It's lodging, restaurants, and bars. Like that's, we all tax knickknacks, but there is some, so you're probably looking at outfitters, and some of those kinds of things too. But I think that's going to be a big piece. I believe the push, just from what I'm hearing, is going to be to do property tax relief through a statewide sales tax by focusing all on education, because it's where the big bulk of property taxes go.
Right.
And if you focus it towards education, you basically end up with, you can level out the playing field in education by funding it through sales tax.
To me, and this is just for conversation, that makes intuitive sense to me. And as a taxpayer, that makes a lot of sense to me. When you're trying to sell that to tourism and recreation folks, they're saying, how does that benefit me? Where's my bang for the buck? So if you directed it towards critical infrastructure at the local level and said this is a user fee essentially for impact on roads and emergency services and whatever else in the community that's being utilized by non-tax paying visitors, that's an easier political sell. But you're right, logically, to buy down either the 95 mills that the state assesses or a local government's allocation to schools, K through 12 schools, makes a lot of sense as well. So that's part of the polling and the discussions across the state is what makes the most sense. And clearly we don't have a picture of that yet.
Does anyone else have questions for Daryl? Well, I appreciate everyone's patience as we waited through this first session together and learned some things. I think we're proactively getting ahead of it now, though. Like 27 session, yeah, it's 2 years away, but we should get a skeleton together of what we're trying to achieve. There's no reason not to at least start that. So, well, thanks, Daryl. Appreciate you representing us up there, and
absolutely, my pleasure.
Especially as we've been guinea pigging this for the first year, so I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, that's our last agenda item. Did anyone else have anything else for the order before we wrap?
This is sort of continuation of the question. We need to basically, shouldn't even wait till fall, start the internal conversations on this. Because it's gonna be a 2-year campaign, organizing what we think. Figuring out if we, proactive issues, if we have them, what the defensive points are, there would certainly be some. And coming to as much of a unified conclusion internally as we can. So I would argue for starting those conversations sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Because by next fall, we're gonna be 3 or 4 months before people start filing for the election. There may be champions in our organization that should be filing to run for the legislature because they know their hometown legislator, the one they already got, is not on our side. And that's got totally independent of party. So we can't start too soon.
Yeah. Agreed. We'll get going with Tom and Dana. Thanks for that. Yes, sir.
And say thank you, sir. You're in a tight meeting. It's been a good day, and also throw out a thank you to Tammy, who's been behind the scenes and doing an awful lot on this.
Yeah, huge kudos to Tammy and Jenny and the team. Appreciate your support and keeping us on track. Well, move we adjourn the meeting. Everyone have safe travels.